Good morning. So nice to be with you today and to share with you some things that I've learned from Jesus and near-death experiences that I've been looking at and studying in the recent last several months and years. As we think about these things, I hope it'll give you a clear vision of what heaven is like. You can go to the first slide if you'd like. Terry and Josh and I were talking recently about some really deep stuff when the topic turned to death and dying. And the question that came up was, what do you want people to say about you at your funeral? I said, well, I hope that they say, Steve was a great doctor. He helped a lot of people. Terry said, I hope that they say he loved greatly. He loved God, he loved his family, he loved others well. Josh thought for a minute, and he said, I hope at my funeral they say, look, he's moving, he's alive. That's not true, but it does sound like Josh, doesn't it? It could be, because Josh is cute, and he's funny, and he's got great stories. Unfortunately, though, I'm your teacher today, and I'm not cute or funny. I consider myself more ruggedly handsome and wise and insightful. Wait, you laugh. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am funny too. No, but seriously though, thank you, William. But seriously though, as a medical doctor and as a Christian, I have been extremely interested in death, dying, and what happens after we die. And you know, in the recent years, the last 50 years or so, there's been a lot of increased reports of near-death experiences. Now, what is, and I'll refer to it as NDEs, near-death experience. What does that mean exactly? That means that when a person dies and their heart stops, within about 15 to 20 seconds, the brain waves and electrical activities of the brain that can be measured began to fade and diminish and flatline. And then, starting in the 1960s, great advances were made in resuscitation of the heart with basic life support, with advanced cardiac life support, and electrical shock, so that when a heart stopped, more and more people were being brought back to life. And many of those who were reported remarkable things, even though their body was clinically dead for minutes to sometimes hours. They came back and resuscitated, and they had amazing stories to tell. Now, and many of these were very similar to one another, and they were also corroborated a lot of things that are said by Jesus and in Scripture. Now, there have always been questions about death and dying and whether there is life after death. Job asked one time, many thousands of years ago, if a man dies, will he live again? Even in the oldest written story, Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, he asked and stated he was afraid to die, and what then? So there have always been questions about death, dying, and life. Is there life after? I think one of the most fascinating things came from Socrates, who Plato wrote about on his dying day. He talked to his disciples, his students, and with reason and logic, he showed them that there must be a life after death. Read the Phaedo sometime, and it will astound you. And in the end, his students said, but really, how can we know for sure? And Socrates said, well, maybe we can't. But fair is the prize, and great is the reward for those who do believe in a life after death. Now, Jesus' followers, once they testified to the fact that they saw Jesus alive 3 days after his crucifixion. They began spreading the word, and they were willing to die for that proclamation. And even Paul, Saul of Tarsus, as he was traveling to persecute the people who believed in the way of Jesus, he was met by this man of great light, Jesus, on the road to Damascus. And then later, he began preaching the same thing he was trying to destroy. And as Dylan read, in Acts the 14th chapter, Paul in Lystra, as he was telling people about Jesus, the resurrected one, they became angry with him after a time and stoned him to death. Now, this was an ancient method of capital punishment. And it says he was dragged out of the city as though he were dead, and undoubtedly thrown into the trash heap outside the city walls. And, they knew how to tell if a body was alive or dead. Was it moving? Was it breathing? Was there a heartbeat, a pulse? And Paul was assumed to be dead. And then after the mob dispersed, his disciples gathered around his lifeless body. And Paul got up, and he walked back into the city and continued to preach the way of Jesus. Now, how long was Paul down and assumed to be dead? We don't know. Was it minutes? Was it hours? But I believe that later in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul tells about this story or this incident in the third person. He says, "Let me tell you about visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man, so that I'm not boasting myself, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether he was in the body or out of the body, dead or alive, I do not know, only God knows. This man was caught up into the third heaven, paradise, and heard and saw things that are inexpressible." Later he described these as the surpassing greatness of these revelations of the afterlife that he was given. Now, that was long ago, you say, but there have been many more records of people who, dying, came back to life and reported remarkable things. I don't think I really have time to go through all these things, but some of them are especially notable. George Ritchie in 1943 was enlisted for the Army over here at Abilene at Camp Barclay, now it's Dyess Air Force Base. But he caught pneumonia. He was supposed to go to medical school. He passed away, and he was even given a death certificate. For 10 minutes, his body was lifeless. And then he resuscitated after somebody gave him a shot of adrenaline in the heart, a experimental procedure, and he revived. He went on to become a doctor and practiced medicine for the next 60 years. And in the 1960s and 70s, he started lecturing on what had happened to him. Many people heard it, like Raymond Moody, who was a PhD in philosophy. He started doing research on the topic. And sure enough, the more people he asked about these near-death experiences, they reported remarkable things that they experienced after their body died. Very skeptical doctors like Michael Sabum, Pim van Lommel, a cardiologist in the Netherlands, started asking their patients, skeptical, not believing that they were true. And their patients, sometimes reluctant because they didn't want to be labeled as crazy, told them reluctantly that yes, they did experience something. Jeffrey Long, an oncologist, has looked at well over 1,300 people who've had these experiences. And he wrote remarkable things. Now, some of these people who had these experiences were people like neurosurgeons, orthopedic surgeons, CEOs of major corporations, airline captains, but also children and adults, blind, disabled, people of all different faiths, people that didn't have, many of these people, very successful, didn't have anything to gain by making up stories. In fact, they had a lot to lose, possibly people questioning their reputation. But they report that they did experience consciousness and events that happened to them after their death experience. Jeffrey Long noticed that so many of these experienced similar things, like an out-of-body experience, looking down on their lifeless body, a heightened sense of reality, awareness, consciousness, and even heightened senses, an intense emotion, usually positive, of peace and joy and love, and even encountering people that they had known that had passed this life already, and many other things. that we don't have time for. I recently read these two books by John Burke, Imagine Heaven and Imagine the God of Heaven, which really sparked my interest again in this subject. And much of what I have to say, I'll share with you from these books. But I asked John Burke, who is a pastor in Austin, if he would come and give this lecture. But because of his speaking schedule, he was too busy, so you get me. But John was a skeptical engineer, and he claims he was an agnostic. He didn't know whether there was God or not. But at the dying bedside, at his father's bedside when he was dying, he noticed this book by Raymond Moody, Life After Life. And he picked it up and started reading, and he couldn't put it down. He read it all night long. And he said, wow, if this is true, this changes everything. And so he started looking in, and he's interviewed over 1,500 near-death experienced people who had these experiences. Because of that, he changed his career and became a minister and wrote these two New York Times best-selling books, Imagine Heaven and the God of Heaven. If you would, let's watch this for a couple of minutes, this video of some of the people that he interviewed.
My dad's an atheist, a hardcore atheist. My mom's an agnostic. Despite my parents, I had always believed in God. Always. It was spring, and I was 16. My horse reared up, fell over backward, and as she hit my chest, I immediately left my body. I was about 30, 40 feet in the air. I just left. I knew I was dead. There was a light over my shoulders, and it was illuminating everything in front of me.
As my Hindu belief, I thought if I die, then that should be it. Maybe I'll come back as another living thing in this life. But it did not happen. I heard moon blue. I asked the doctor, so what actually happened? He said, well, they could not revive your heart. A bright light was appearing before me. I knew that light had superior authority, superior power. I knew it was a divine light. I fell in love with that light.
Has fallen Rwanda to the parents with different ethnic backgrounds. One Hutu and another Tutsi, mixing with Islam and the traditional ancestry worship. I was diagnosed by blood cancer. The doctor said that this cancer is on fourth stage and it cannot be healed. When I died, I found myself in a very big room, apartment area. It is white because it was very shiny, that kind of sunshine pierced my eyes.
When all the COVID situation was happening and I was extremely sick, I just knew that I was going to die. And I started floating on top of my husband's head. And I'm looking at my body. I was just like, am I dead? And I started screaming, God, please forgive me. Because I realized it was real in that moment. I knew that there was something missing. This light pops gold, like seeing the sun without burning. I knew that that was the voice of God because of...
Thank you, Liz. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Liz. That's probably enough to give you an idea of what takes place and what these people report. But this morning, I would like you to imagine with me the greatness and wonders of heaven. Because I think if we could get a vision of what heaven was really like, it would change everything. Most of us have a horrible view of heaven. We think it's kind of vague, shadowy, floating around on clouds, some vague existence. Maybe we're doing nothing but playing the harp without really anything to do. And for most people, they view hell as the more fun and interesting place, and heaven's, quite frankly, just a little bit boring, maybe like some too long sermon at a worship service. But listen, that is not what near-death experienced survivors report. nor what Scripture or Jesus thinks about heaven. That's not what we're destined for. We are destined for a heaven that is much greater and much better than that. And I think if we could get a proper view or vision of heaven, it would change everything. It would change what we prioritize in life. It would change how willing we are to sacrifice the here and now for a better future, for a long-term eternity. It would change how we view our suffering that we have to go through in this life. It would change what you fear or what you don't fear, or how you view the future, whether with optimistic anticipation or whether you see the future with fear and dread. So if you would, this morning, go with me as we take a mental journey and imagine the beauty and the joyful place that is heaven. Captain Dale Black, an airplane pilot, took off from LA in the early 60s, and he noticed that his plane was losing power and failed and crashed into a monument. This is a picture of the wreckage that hit this monument. He suddenly found himself looking down on the wreckage of the airplane and his mangled and bloody body. However, rather than being black and unconscious and in some void, he found himself viewing all these things, even his own body, from above. And his vision and his awareness were more enhanced, and his life seemed more real than he had ever experienced before. He was joined by two, as he describes it, celestial beings, angels, messengers, divine beings that were escorting him through a dark valley, through a pathway of light. He says that he even experienced these points of light coming at him like an airplane flying through a snowstorm. And his vision was so enhanced, he could see in 360 degrees all around him, and he could see far off for miles with the closest of detail. He thinks he was given, because he was a pilot, he was given an airplane's view and tour of heaven. And he saw the most beautiful and magnificent golden city gleaming with lights. He said the music coming from the city was enchanting. I was overwhelmed by the beauty, and the sense of belonging in this place filled my heart. I never wanted to leave. The light didn't just shine on things, it shined through things. And I knew that this light was also somehow connected with life and love. He was also given a tour outside the city, as well as the parks inside the city. And he said outside the city there were mountains and beautiful forests and trees of all different kinds. Beautiful grass, so well manicured, every blade of grass was cut perfectly. He also noted that everything was beautiful and pulsated with life. He said, I had a feeling that this is what I was made for. Now, near-death experiencers who love to play golf while on this earth always seem to notice the beautiful grass of heaven. Dr. Richard Eby, a gynecologist, fell 2 stories and hit his head on the concrete. And he considered himself in life an amateur botanist. And he described all the unique species of flowers and trees. He had studied thousands and thousands of species, some that he recognized, but there were some that were so new and unique, he noted that he couldn't even imagine all these different kinds of trees and flowers and plants. Ian McCormick was a surfer who was stung 4 times with box jellyfish. They say one sting of a box jellyfish can kill a person. He was stung 4 or 5 times and had a death experience. Marv Besteman, a bank president who loved to fish and sail. They described this tour of heaven also. And you know what they described? A surfer, a scuba diver, a fisherman. They described the blue, beautiful, multicolored blue water. that was crystal clear in rivers and the fishing boats that lined the shores. You know what's interesting? Hebrews 8 and some verses in chapter 9 says that things on earth are a copy or a shadow of heavenly realities. I believe that God created earth in the image of heaven, just as he created man in the image of God. And we are better able, I believe, to imagine heaven when we realize that all we love about earth is merely a shadow or a copy of the greater realities to come. A beautiful place that was made for all of us. Yeah, but what if you have this beautiful place, but you've got this old decrepit body that can't really enjoy it? Well, don't worry, there's an answer for that. We are going to have a body, but a much better body. Would you just imagine with me, think about the thing that you feared most in life, death and dying, the death of your earthly body. And suddenly, you close your eyes in death one moment, but open your eyes the next to a whole new existence and a whole new body. You're suddenly freed from the old, aged body that no longer works very well, and you now are alive like you've never been before. Now, you still have a body, but there's no more of the aches and pains and the limitations of old age. The crippled and the lame walk, the blind see, and even those, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. Even those who see have better eyesight than they've ever had before. And even the blind report being able to see. NDEers, or near-death experiencers, feel more alive and more real and more aware than they ever have before. Imagine that your anxiety of death and dying fades away into a peace and a joy and a forever young, that you may feel like a kid again, running and playing and skipping and hopping. Children, think about it. Children that are born with birth defects and limitations like cerebral palsy and muscular dystrophy, and older people who are trapped inside a body that no longer works well, like my sister who recently died of ALS. Her mind was good, but her spirit was good, but she was trapped in a body that couldn't move. It must feel like a bird being let out from a cage when we find a new body that runs and leaps and shouts of joy. You know, of the thousands or hundreds or thousands of reports and people that I've heard about, I don't remember seeing one account of a report of somebody in heaven who had bodily limitations in that new heaven and new earth. Well, what about pain and suffering that we have of old age or this life? There is no more crying, pain, or sorrow. Revelation 21 says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first earth had passed away, and I saw the holy city. I heard a loud voice from the throne, a voice of authority, saying, Behold, the dwelling of God is among men, and he will be with them, dwell with them. They shall be his people, and he will wipe away their tears from their eyes. There will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any death, no more sorrow, pain, or crying. These former things have passed away. Wow. It makes what Mother Teresa said so true. In light of heaven, the worst suffering of this earth, even a life full of the most atrocious tortures or suffering, will seem to be no more serious than one night in an inconvenient hotel. Now, when Daniel and I were talking this week as he was helping me prepare the sermon, he said, well, why does all this stuff really matter? And I thought that's a great question. We're going to all go through some very terrible, hard things. The loss of loved ones. We've all felt that pain and that sorrow that came when we heard about children dying in the Central Texas flooding. And what grief, what agony. But what helps us is that knowing that we have immortal souls, that when this body dies, our soul, our life does not cease to exist. Now, granted, it doesn't take away all the pain, and we should never minimize that. It does hurt when we lose, and those who we love leave this world, and we are left behind. But what Jesus teaches about our future is really true, and near-death experiences confirm that this body does not cease to exist. And death is not permanent, but is a transition to a life more fully with God, to the source of love and beauty and goodness. George Ritchie, who I mentioned earlier, said, "Death is just a doorway from one room to another." And by the way, George Ritchie, he experienced this death at his 20s and came back, became a doctor, taught about this, but he also established the Universal Youth Corps, which was the inspiration for the U.S. Peace Corps that has now done great good throughout the world and changed lives. He was never, as most near-death experiences are, after they go through this, they are never again afraid to die. And George Ritchie wasn't either, even though he lived 60 more years. Jesus said, I'm sorry, I keep messing that up. Jesus said, "Don't fear those who can kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul." Why? Because the soul is eternal. We are a spiritual soul. What does that mean? We have reasoning. We have a rational mind. We have a free will. And the soul is what enlivens us. Michael Eggstrom believes, a neurosurgeon and a philosopher who studied Thomas Aquinas, believes that the soul is what leaves a dead body and what is in all of us. That which is animating our body is our soul. And when we leave behind a dead body, that soul has departed and has returned to the heavenly realm. And it is a spiritual soul that has a mind, a consciousness. Now, what does all that mean? Well, it really comes down to some deep stuff about who am I? Am I just a sequence of genetic code? Am I nothing more than just a body with these physical hands and feet and heart and lungs? No, you're much more than that. You are a spiritual soul that has a mind with thoughts and feelings and experiences and a memory and consciousness. And what makes up who we are is our relationships, which form a whole person or personality that make us who we are. And did you know that none of these things are made out of material matter? Yes, a body decays, but not one of these things is made out of matter that can decay. And so, our spirit and our soul is eternal. Nothing that we are that is most important is lost by death. Say this together with me, the words of Dallas Willard. Let's read this together. As a child of God, you are, I am an unceasing spiritual being with a glorious future and an eternal destiny in God's great future. All of those who get a glimpse of heaven agree on one thing, that love is the most important thing. Love is the point of it all. In the presence of God, they experience a love that words can't fully communicate. And people of heaven seem to be permeated with a life that is just full of love. So if love and relationships are the goal of life on earth, as Jesus said they should, and Paul said they should be, do we have any reason to believe that they wouldn't be the most important point of heaven? Everything that God has done for us through the prophets and through Jesus is for the sake of restoring people to a loving relationship with God, so that then He can teach us how to love one another well. And He intends those relationships to last in heaven as well. In fact, heaven will be the greatest family reunion of family and friends that we will ever imagine. Now, when I think of great family reunions of family and friends, I think of our own Martha and Charles McConnell. They know how to have a family reunion because many of their family during the reunion have been here with us. And I don't know, Charles, Martha, was this in Jamaica? I got this off their Facebook, so they didn't know this was coming. But I love the picture because Martha's got her hand out there. It's like she's welcoming us into our family. And guess what? If Martha or Charles or any one of us go there, if we had a relationship on earth, it may very well be that we are part of the welcoming committee that greet one another in heaven. Don Piper had a head-on collision with an 18-wheeler. And Marv Besteman, a bank president, also suffered a near-death experience. Both described a welcoming committee of family and friends that they met during their near-death experience. Marv said, "Those who had spiritually influenced me and those I had encouraged, those were the ones that met me in my welcoming committee. Two of those friends were my prayer warriors. They were significant to me in my life. Everyone that I saw had been influential in shaping my life in some way." Now, Jesus, in the parable of the shrewd manager of Luke 16, talked about this guy who wasn't managing his master's money well. So the master called him in to give an accounting, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to lose my position. I better call in all these people so I can say, how much do you owe the master? 100 bushels of wheat? Let's cut it down to 50. How much do you owe? Let's cut it down to 20. And the master praised the shrewd servant for acting wisely. And at the end of that parable, Jesus said, "Use your worldly treasure and resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your earthly possessions fail or are gone, they will welcome you into an eternal home." Wow, I had never understood what that parable was all about. But we should be using our resources now to bless other people and to help them and encourage them. And when we do, we're preparing for ourselves friends who will welcome us into an eternal home. The Apostle Paul said to the Thessalonians, "You will be our joy and our cause of reward when we stand before our Lord Jesus Christ." You know, a study at the University of Virginia of the people who met others on their near-death experiences, 95% of them met family members. 5% met friends. So apparently our families, for all their brokenness, for all their problems, seem to be really important in heaven. Genesis says Abraham died and he was gathered to his people. And then Isaac died and he was gathered to his people. You one day may be gathered to your people as well. But don't worry, if your family is all broken and dysfunctional like my wife's family, just teasing. Her family's very, very mature, and I was going to say my family is dysfunctional, but my family's here, so I couldn't say that. But even if we have broken and dysfunctional families, God's love has the remarkable ability to restore and heal those broken relationships. Now, you know, we mentioned that many people think heaven is boring, but near-death experiencers say that the life to come is more real and more exciting than anything we have ever imagined or could experience. The beauty, the thrills, the adventure, even the joy, even the exploration. Josh loves to, and Daniel love to explore Paladura and the Grand Tetons and Zion National Park. But imagine exploring the galaxies and the cosmos that are endless. You'll have that opportunity. Heaven will be such a joyous place. It will be anything but boring. Imagine for a minute what your dream home is like. Whoops, well, I didn't mean to go there. Imagine your dream home. Maybe it's a lodge by the sea. There you go, you had it. Maybe it's a lodge in the mountains. Maybe it's a cottage by the sea. Maybe it's in one of your favorite cities like Paris or Rome or Santa Barbara. God loves to give his children wonderful gifts. And Jesus said, "In my Father's abode," or my Father's house, "there are many dwelling places, and I'm going to prepare a place for you, that where I am, you may be also." You know, Rebecca Springer, who had a near-death experience in the 1890s, was in a coma for 3 weeks. She was met by her favorite brother-in-law, who gave her a tour, took her to a home where she met family and friends, she says, and they were showing her the place that they were getting ready for her. I wonder, will God be using us to do the work of Jesus when he says, "I'm going to prepare your eternal home and dwelling place"? That's what Rebecca Springer thought. And, you know, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing? Because we all will have things to do. We'll even have creative and enjoyable work to be a part of. Jesus told the 12 apostles, "In the renewal of all things, you will sit on 12 thrones of authority, ruling or judging the 12 tribes of Israel." To the talented man who did well with what he was given in this life, he said, "I will make you ruler over 5 cities." So we will have meaningful, joyful work. Now, this was a house designed by an architect here on earth. But when I saw that, I said, wow, that guy designing that house was having an awful lot of fun. Now, Daniel, Trace, Bruce, they build houses. So if you guys go ahead of me, I want something like this when I come. Okay. The work, though, will be enjoyable. Work here is tiring. Often we're stuck with jobs we don't like, but there it will be passion and exhilarating. It'll be like being in the flow. And if you've ever listened to Steve Jobs describe how he was designing the first Apple computers, sometimes he couldn't sleep. He was just so excited about it. That's the kind of exciting, exhilarating work that we may have. Well, heaven is anything but boring, but listen, we're going a little long, so I'm going to skip this part about hell. But one thing that I would tell you is there are people who experience some terrifying NDEs as well. And the thing that I would want you to leave with you, after I heard Howard Strom talk about his experience as an atheist and the terrifying experience he had, he was given an opportunity to come back. He left his job as a teaching professor in the art department where he was the chairman, went back to seminary school and became a preacher, a minister, because of what he experienced. It changed his life. but it reminded me that God is so good. When asked about people who might go to hell, Dallas Willard said, God is so good that he will do the very best for every person that they will possibly allow him to do. And C.S. Lewis said, I fully believe that even the damned are in one sense successful, because all their life they said, God, leave me alone, leave me alone, leave me alone. And one day God will honor that request and leave them alone to enjoy the horrible freedom from God that they have always demanded throughout their life. Well, some near-death experiencers report that there is a life review. You know, many people experience a review of their entire life in the presence of the Lord and angels, possibly others. They watch the scenes of their life play out before them in the presence of a loving God who doesn't condemn them. Now, many of them describe that they feel ashamed, they feel condemned themselves when they look over their life experience, but they always experience with the Lord, who is not condemning, but is loving them. I thought that was very fascinating. And often it begins with a question. What have you done with your life? Howard Strom said, it's not said in condemnation, but in love, to prompt reflection and learning. Mary Neal, an orthopedic surgeon who spent 30 minutes underwater in a kayaking accident in Chile, said, my life was laid bare for all its good and its bad for me to see. And I could see the ripple effects of the things that I did and how it affected me and my life and other people as well, even 20 and 30 and 40 times removed from the original incident. The rippling effect of what our actions do. How earth-shattering that might be, how insightful that might be for us to see. Howard Strom said no matter what he watched, as we watched it together, no matter what we watched together, me doing over my life, they communicated this deep love for me, even as I saw how my horrible acts hurt the Lord and hurt other people. The reason he didn't like what I did was because it detracted from what I was meant to be and my full potential. And even their secret thoughts and motives were played out. One NDEer said, as I reviewed my life, I felt my emotions that I felt at that time, but I also felt the emotions of others that I had hurt, and I felt their pain. I could see how I had been motivated by ambition and selfishness and fear, or even for just my own happiness, but it hurt other people as well. Wow. What if we had that ability to look at our life now like that? How it would change who we are and make us better. What if my every thought and my every motive was laid bare for you to see? But so oftentimes I learn to hide it behind this facade. Well, I need to bring this to a close, but I didn't want to close without talking to you about the highlight of heaven. Imagine that day in the beauty of God's world, experiencing all the beauty of this world or the next to come, with its mountains and its oceans and its forests and trees and flowers and animals, even the cosmos that you can explore in the galaxies. But of all this great beauty and all this great scenery, 70% of NDEers describe the highlight of heaven not as a place, not as scenery, but as a person. Dean Braxton said, they, as well as you and I, will experience and encounter a being of light. That being is light and love and life. And everything he touches emits beauty and love. Dean Braxton said, Jesus is more beautiful and wonderful and glorious than I can even explain, beyond our words, as Paul said. In his eyes, I saw the love for every human being, for every creature, for all the creation of God. At first, I thought his love was only for me, but as soon as I thought about another person, I saw his love for that person too. And it's even fascinating that the blind people who experience these NDEs, they describe the same man of light that draws them to himself with a warmth and love when they look into his eyes. You know, even many Muslims, Hindus, Jews, atheists describe meeting this man of light, and they recognize him as Jesus. And they spontaneously want to praise and worship him. But you know, not only is Jesus seen as this beautiful being of light and love, this may stretch us just a little bit. Oops, sorry about that. Could it be that Jesus is also fun and funny? Now, if that stretches your imagination just a little bit, maybe we need to think outside the box. Because all of us, with our finite little minds, we put God in a box and we think this is what he's like. But have you ever thought that God, Jesus, is one of the happiest, most joyful beings, is the most happy and joyful being in all the universe? One of the great joys of life is laughter and fun and playfulness. And Jesus and God is the most joyful, exciting, fun, happiest being in all the universe that we will never want to leave. Jesus shocked his own followers when, as busy as he was, they tried to keep the children, but Jesus wanted to be with the kids. He said, "Let the children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such children as these." And one time I mentioned that verse recently, and Ezra said, "Well, you forgot to mention that you've got to repent or think anew and become like a little child." And Ezra, you are so right. We have to become like a little child. And maybe it is such that there's such an innocence and a playfulness that sometimes gets squeezed out of us as adults. But Jesus will restore and model that joy and that fun for us. He said, "I want my joy to be in you, and I just want it to be overflowing." You know, children who have these near-death experiences, they often describe a running and a playing with Jesus in the field. Richard Eby noted the omnipresence of Jesus when he said, it was interesting that he could commune with the Father, he could play with little children, he could interact with adults, and he could be with you and me in the same instance. Jesus were constantly running to him, Richard Eby said, and he received them all, for he loved them all. Little 5-year-old Colton described sitting in the lap and hugging Jesus. We were created for intimacy and oneness with God and others. The angel said, "For the wedding of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready." The bride, that's us, the church. He's made himself ready. Write this down. Blessed, happy, joyful are those who are invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb. It will be the greatest party that's ever been thrown when all who love God are united with him forever. Isaiah tells about this great party in Isaiah 25. "On this mountain, The Lord Almighty will prepare a banquet of rich food for all people. He will get rid of death forever. The Lord will wipe away all tears from their faces. He will remove our shame. Let's rejoice and be glad in his salvation, his deliverance. I want you to imagine with me heaven, and imagine especially the highlight of heaven. Like 5-year-old Mary Olivia, who didn't want to leave the one she called the man in heaven because his love was so warm and so kind. I don't think you and I are going to want to leave that love either. Thank you. I hope it has been a blessing to you, but I want you to know that this has changed me, and it's changed a lot of people. Because these people who experience these near-death experiences, so many of them say their life was never the same again. If you'll get a glimpse of heaven and the beauty and the majesty and the wonder that you are destined for, it'll change your life, and we will just be on fire for the Lord. Thank you for your time.